What's up, everybody? Welcome to Nutrition Corner. We're going through our micronutrient series. Today we are working on fat-soluble vitamins. All right, so because there's only the four that we're going to concentrate on, we got the A, D, E, and K. We're going to go into detail on what each one does and what the deficiencies are and where to find them. And then we're going to circle back to our water solubles and we're going to break those down into what they are, where to find them, and what the deficiencies cause, things like that. So let's see here. Let me get my cheat sheet up. And all right. So starting off, let me grab my shake. Hope everybody liked class this morning. All right. So remember the difference between water soluble and fat soluble, meaning it's a polar versus a non-polar substance or molecule. So polar, it binds to the polar nature of a water molecule. Non-polar, it will bind to the non-polar nature of a fat molecule. So think like neutral charges. So covalent bonds, the sharing of electrons as opposed to the donation or receiving of electrons. So largely this is going to be like our hydrocarbons. So think about what happens when you mix, like we all know, water and oil. They don't mix. Well, oil's a hydrocarbon, just like gasoline. So water and gasoline, they don't mix. So a fat-soluble vitamin is not going to mix well with water. However, it will mix and mix with a non-polar solvent. So without having the hydrocarbons or the fatty acids present, the molecule is not going to be able to pass through the digestive tract into the bloodstream, even if your body needs that substance. So if you take in vitamin A, for example, being a fat-soluble vitamin, if there is no fat coming in with the food or readily available to meet up with the vitamin A in the digestive tract, it's not going to be able to get pulled into the bloodstream. So even if your body needs it and if there's a deficiency, if there's no mechanism to pull it into the bloodstream, then your body's going to excrete it. The plus side of fat-soluble versus water-soluble vitamins is, or micronutrients in general, because they're fat soluble, they're able to be stored in fat because our body is constantly turning over water. Water soluble vitamins, if we have too much of it, your body kind of just gets rid of it. With fat soluble vitamins, they can be stored. So it's one of the few things that your body can actually store. And remember, we're talking about the vitamin A, D, E, and K. Going into vitamin A, so vitamin A and vitamin E, they're considered groups. So it's not just this structure is vitamin A. There's a couple different kind of things that go into it. So we have retinol as opposed to retinol. So retinol actually gets converted into retinol. If you use skincare products, you've heard of retinol because it's really good at stimulating the production of new skin cells. So you can use it topically. It's used in like skincare products and things like that to help hydrate the skin. The way that it does that is it stimulates the growth of new skin cells. Typically anything left over, some of it's going to get stored, some of it's going to get converted into retinol or retinaldehyde. Retinaldehyde or retinol is whatever kind of gets left over. If it's not stored, it gets converted into retinoic acid. Retinoic acid is something that they'll use in like prescription strength skincare treatments because it directly affects gene expression. So it kind of interrupts the protein synthesis portion. So not to get too crazy into the science, but going back to retinaldehyde, it's what actually converts the light perceived by your eye into a signal that your brain interprets as vision or as sight. So without that, we have the deficiencies in vitamin A include blindness, blurry double vision, things like that. Vitamin A actually can be created or converted by your body from beta carotene. So that's a type of vitamin A. Beta carotene, everyone thinks carrots, but think anything yellow, orange, red. Also, you got the deep greens like kale and spinach. Those are good sources for your vitamin A. So moving on to our vitamin D, everybody knows vitamin D. Healthy bones and metabolizes calcium. So without vitamin D in your system, your body cannot uptake calcium. Right, and we remember calcium helps the body create the bone matrix and things like that. So aside from those, it plays a critical role in the immune system function, and it is one of the most widely deficient micronutrients, particularly in the north, particularly in colder months, because what happens is our body can create vitamin D out of cholesterol when it interacts with sunlight. So now that you know that part, it kind of makes sense that in the northern hemisphere, in the winter or colder months, people are deficient in vitamin D because they're not exposed to sunlight as much. They're either staying indoors or they're covered up when they go outdoors. But little fun fact about vitamin D, because of rickets, so your vitamin D deficiency, it can cause bone deformities, abnormalities, developmental issues, growth issues, things like that. So because of those deficiencies, rickets was actually the first disease that was directly linked to a deficiency in a micronutrient. So moving on, it's typically fortified into dairy products these days. So your milk is going to typically be fortified with vitamin D, things like that. Moving on to vitamin E, it's one of the main antioxidant molecules. So it performs that function by preventing or limiting the lipid peroxidation. So what that means is it basically maintains the integrity of your cell's walls. All right, we know the cells are made up of those phospholipids, that phospholipid bilayer. So what happens is when those free radical oxygens are floating around, it kind of picks apart the wall of the cell and it loses its integrity or its structural integrity. So it can, parts of it can fall apart. It becomes one of those older cells that gets screened out. So what the vitamin E does is it kind of reinforces that wall by picking off those free radicals. So that's its job as the antioxidant. It'll pick off those free radicals to help that cell wall stay longer. So a big source for the vitamin E is going to be your nuts and seeds, things like that. And that brings us to our last one, vitamin K. So vitamin K, very crucial in blood clotting, and it works in conjunction with vitamin D to remodel the bone matrix. So knowing those two things, a deficiency in vitamin K can lead to hypocoagulation, so not hypercoagulation, hypocoagulation, meaning that your blood does not coagulate enough, meaning that your blood is going to be thin, which is why if you're on certain blood pressure or blood thinning medications, you're not supposed to be taking vitamin K because it might thin too much. So let me see. Oh, and in conjunction with vitamin D, helping remodel the bone matrix is what reinforces bone. So the lack or deficiency in vitamin D is what's going to cause osteoporosis or PNE or things like that. Good sources of vitamin K is going to be your dark leafy greens, so your spinaches and kales. So you'll see there's a lot of overlap with these things, with a lot of the micronutrients. We always talk about the dark leafy greens. We always talk about eating the rainbow, so the different colored fruits and vegetables. And we talk about nuts and seeds. And then we talk about seafood and then sprinkling in a little bit of protein from land animal sources. So you get that whole, this is why we always preach about getting a little bit from all these different sources and eating everything in moderation, because you're exposing yourself to all these different things, and all these micronutrients in these different things are going to find their way into your diet as long as you're keeping your diet spread out. All right, so that's going to be everything for this week with the fat-soluble vitamins. We're going to backtrack a little bit to the water solubles, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail on what each of them is, where we can find them, how they help us, and what the deficiency in them can cause. All right, so we'll see you next week. Have fun and be well.